Get your filthy black hands off that safe.
Sir, I was just...
Did I ask you to speak? You mop floors, you scrub toilets. That's what your kind does.
Celine Brooks stood still, mop in hand, eyes on the Whitfield 1889 bolted to the concrete. 10 experts had tried for 72 hours. Drill bits snapped. $10 million in consulting fees. Wasted.
You're turning it wrong.
Harlan laughed. His men laughed. The sound bounced off basement walls.
What would someone who uses her brain to mop floors know? If you're so smart, let's see you try.
She knelt, bare fingers on cold steel, eyes closed, listening, and acted. 60 seconds later, what unfolded before them left the entire room stunned into silence. This is the story of a maid who brought a mafia empire to its knees. One click. The Whitfield's door swung open, like it had been waiting for her all along. The room went dead. 10 experts stood frozen in the doorway where Harlan had just sent them. Not one moved, not one blinked. The safe that had eaten 72 hours of their lives, their tools, their reputations, opened by a woman holding a mop. Harlan's mouth hung open. His cigar dropped ash onto his Italian shoes. Inside the safe sat a black USB drive, a leather-bound ledger, and 4 stacks of $100 bills wrapped in plastic. Celine saw it all in the half-second before Harlan lunged forward and slammed the door shut. "Nobody moves," he said. His voice had changed. The arrogance was gone. Something colder had taken its place. "You," he pointed at Celine. "How?" "My grandfather," she said. "He worked on Whitfields." "Worked on them where?" "Banks, vaults, government buildings." She paused. "He was the best locksmith in Mississippi, maybe the country." Harlan studied her face the way a man studies a winning lottery ticket he found in the gutter. "What's your name again?" Celine Brooks." He nodded slowly. "Celine Brooks, the maid who opens safes." He turned to his men. "Get her a chair, get her water, and somebody close that goddamn door." 26 years earlier, in a clapboard house on the edge of Tupelo, Mississippi, a 6-year-old girl sat on her grandfather's lap. Elijah Brooks was 71. His hands were enormous, scarred, calloused, and impossibly gentle. On the workbench in front of them lay a disassembled padlock, its pins scattered like baby teeth. "Every lock tells a story, baby girl." His voice rumbled through his chest into her small back. "You just gotta listen." He placed her fingertips on the tumbler. "Feel that? That little catch, right there?" She felt it. A resistance no bigger than a heartbeat. "That's the lock talking to you. It's saying, 'I'm ready. Turn me now.'" She turned. The lock popped open. Celine squealed. Elijah laughed, a sound like thunder rolling over cotton fields. "You got the touch, girl. Lord help us, you got the touch." For 8 years, he taught her everything. Not from books. Elijah had never finished 4th grade. He taught her through feel, through sound, through patience. Combination locks, deadbolts, tubular pin tumblers, disc detainers. By 12, she could open a master lock in 9 seconds blindfolded. By 14, she was rebuilding antique mechanisms that locksmiths half a century younger couldn't diagnose. Elijah Brooks had once been the only man, black or white, trusted to service the vault at First National Bank of Tupelo. In 1962, when the bank's main vault jammed during a federal audit, they called Elijah. He drove through the service entrance, fixed the jam in under 4 minutes, and left through the same back door. The bank president shook his hand in the parking lot and told him never to come through the front entrance. No newspaper covered it. No plaque went up. The bank's official report credited a mechanical malfunction that resolved itself. 60 years of mastery, erased in one sentence. Elijah died on a Tuesday in March. Celine was 14. Her mother, Ruth, worked double shifts at a textile plant and still couldn't cover the funeral costs. Neighbors passed a hat. They buried him in an unmarked plot at the edge of the county cemetery, where the grass grew wild and the headstones leaned like tired old men. Around his granddaughter's neck, he left one thing, a brass key, old and heavy, that opened nothing. "What's it for, Mama?" Ruth shook her head. "He said you'd figure it out someday." Celine dropped out of school at 16. Ruth's lungs had surrendered. Years of textile dust had hardened into pulmonary fibrosis. Every breath cost effort. Every hospital visit cost money they didn't have. The medical bills stacked like bricks against a wall that kept growing. Celine cleaned houses. She cleaned offices. She cleaned a church, a car dealership, and a veterinary clinic. She cleaned until her hands cracked and bled, and then she cleaned some more. At night, she rubbed lotion into her knuckles and stared at the brass key and wondered what her grandfather would think of the woman she'd become. She never touched a lock professionally, not once. There was no career path for a black girl from Tupelo with no diploma and a dying mother. The talent Elijah had spent 8 years nurturing sat locked inside her like a secret she couldn't afford to tell. Until tonight. Back in Harlan's basement, the air had shifted. The experts were gone, dismissed with a wave, their contracts voided, their NDAs enforced under threat. Only 3 men remained: Harlan, his lieutenant Marco Trent, and a thick-necked enforcer named Dale, who stood by the door like furniture. Harlan sat across from Celine. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, pushed one toward her. "You saw what was inside," he said, not a question. Celine said nothing. "The USB, the ledger, you saw them." "I wasn't looking." "Don't lie to me, Celine. Not tonight. Tonight is the beginning of something." He leaned forward. "I have 6 more safes, different locations, different models. My previous specialist is no longer available." He let the word "available" hang in the air like smoke. "You work for me now." "I'm a maid, Mr. Harlan." "You are a maid. Now you're something more valuable." He smiled, a thin reptilian expression that never reached his eyes. "I'll triple your salary. Your mother's hospital bills, covered, every last one." Celine's hand went to the brass key at her throat. She could feel her grandfather's fingerprints worn into the metal, ghost grooves from decades of handling. "And if I say no?" Harlan tilted his head. "Your mother is at St. Catherine's, isn't she? Room 414. Nice nurses there, very attentive." He sipped his whiskey. "It would be a shame if the funding for that wing dried up." The threat landed like ice water, slow, total, paralyzing. Celine understood. This wasn't an offer. This was a cage. She looked at the safe. The Whitfield 1889, a machine built to keep secrets. She'd opened it in 60 seconds, and in doing so, she'd locked herself into something far worse. "When do I start?" she asked. Harlan raised his glass. "You already have." In that basement, Celine had opened more than a safe. She'd opened a door into a world where the only way out was through every locked secret Victor Harlan had ever buried. The first safe Harlan sent her to was in a warehouse on the south side of the city, behind a fish processing plant that hadn't processed fish in 15 years. The smell hit Celine before the door opened. Rust, salt, and something chemical she couldn't name. Marco Trent drove her in a black SUV with tinted windows. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her. He opened the car door the way someone opens a gate for livestock. Inside the warehouse, past rows of empty freezer units, a Chubb Mark IV sat bolted to a steel platform, military grade, the kind of safe governments used for classified documents in the 1970s. 2 of Harlan's men stood guard. One of them, a red-haired man with a scar running from his ear to his chin, looked at Celine and snorted. "This is the locksmith? Harlan's sending the cleaning lady now?" The other guard laughed. "Maybe she'll mop the combination out of it." Celine set down her bag, a canvas tote she'd packed with her grandfather's tools. Picks, tension wrenches, a stethoscope modified with a copper bell that Elijah had built himself in 1958. She laid them on the floor beside the chub, like a surgeon preparing instruments. She pressed her ear to the cold steel, closed her eyes. The tumbler spoke in clicks and whispers, a language only she and her grandfather had ever understood. 4 minutes. The chub swung open. Inside, 3 handguns, a vacuum-sealed brick of cash, and a manila envelope thick with photographs. Celine glimpsed faces, men in suits, shaking hands with Harlan at events. Politicians, judges, a police chief she recognized from the news. She stepped back. The red-haired guard stared at her like she'd performed a magic trick. "Don't touch anything inside," Trent said from behind her. "Your job ends when the door opens." The second safe was 3 days later. A vintage Mosler in the back office of a restaurant called Carmine's. White tablecloths out front, blood money in the back. Trent led her through the kitchen, past cooks who kept their eyes on their cutting boards, through a steel door marked private, and down a narrow staircase that smelled like grease and old wine. The Mosler sat against the far wall, flanked by filing cabinets. This one was newer, 1980s, electronic bypass with a mechanical failsafe. 7 minutes of patient work, her fingers reading the pins like braille, and the door released with a soft exhale. Inside, a ledger of wire transfers to offshore accounts, dates going back 11 years. Names she didn't recognize. Amounts that made her stomach tighten. 6 figures, 7 figures, repeating monthly like a heartbeat. Celine's hands shook as she closed the door. Not from the cold, from what she'd seen. Each safe peeled back another layer of Harlan's empire, and each layer was darker than the last. As Trent stepped outside to take a phone call, Celine stood alone in the basement for 30 seconds. Her phone was in her pocket. Her hands moved before her mind caught up. 2 photos of the ledger's first page. The shutter sound was off. She slid the phone back and steadied her breathing. She didn't know who she'd show them to. She didn't know what they meant, exactly. But something in her bones told her that evidence was the only currency that could buy her freedom. On the drive back, she spoke for the first time. "I want to talk to Harlan." Trent glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "About what?" "About the terms." Trent almost smiled. Almost. "The Maid wants to negotiate." "The Maid just opened 2 safes your entire crew couldn't crack with dynamite." "Yes. She wants to negotiate." Harlan agreed to meet her. Not in the basement this time, in his study, a wood-paneled room on the 2nd floor of his estate. Bookshelves lined every wall. A fire crackled in the marble hearth. Above it hung an oil painting of Harlan himself, seated like a king on a throne. He gestured to the seat across from his desk. Celine sat. She didn't touch the whiskey he offered. "You wanted to talk," he said. "Talk." "I have conditions." Harlan's eyebrows rose. The faintest flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Conditions. From the help. From the person who does what your 10 experts couldn't." Celine held his gaze. 4 conditions. Non-negotiable. She held up one finger. "First, my mother's medical bills. All of them. Past, present, and future. Paid in full through a legitimate insurance provider. Not cash, not favors. Insurance." Second finger. "Nobody touches me. Nobody touches my mother. Nobody goes near St. Catherine's. Not your men. Not your lawyers. Not anyone who's ever heard your name." Third finger. "I open locks. That's it. I don't carry anything. I don't transport anything. I don't know what's inside and I don't want to know. The door opens. I walk away." Fourth finger. "When you're done, when all your safes are open, I'm free. No debt, no favors, no calls at midnight. I go back to my life and you forget my name." The fire popped. Harlan stared at her for a long moment. The amusement was gone now. Something else sat in his eyes. Not respect exactly, but recognition. The way a predator recognizes another predator's territory. "You've got nerve, Celine Brooks. I've got skills you need. That's not nerve, that's leverage." He leaned back, steepled his fingers. "Agreed. All 4. Celine knew he was lying. She could hear it the same way she heard tumblers, the false click, the mechanism that gave too easily. Victor Harlan didn't honor agreements. He honored power. And the moment she stopped being useful, every promise would evaporate like whiskey on a hot engine. But she needed time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to figure out what a maid from Tupelo does when she's trapped inside a machine built by monsters. She stood. I'll need access to my grandfather's remaining tools. They're in a storage unit in Tupelo. Done. And Mr. Harlan? She paused at the door. The next safe. I'll need to know the model in advance. Every lock has a personality. I like to study before I meet them. For the first time, something genuine crossed his face. Curiosity. Not about locks, about her. You talk about them like they're alive. My grandfather did too. Her hand found the brass key at her neck. The metal was warm from her skin. He said the hardest lock to open is fear, Mr. Harlan. I used to think he meant the locksmith's fear. She looked at him steadily. Now I think he meant the man who hides behind the lock. She walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. In the hallway, Marco Trent was waiting. He fell into step beside her. Nobody talks to him like that, he said quietly. Maybe somebody should. Trent said nothing for 10 paces. Then, the next safe is a fichet bochet, French, 1940s, relocated from a bank vault in Lyon after the war. Celine nodded. A fichet bochet, triple curtain mechanism. Her grandfather had described one to her once, called it the most beautiful lock ever built. I'll be ready, she said. Outside, the night air hit her face like cold water. She climbed into the back seat of the SUV and pressed her forehead against the window. Her reflection stared back, tired, scared, and utterly alone. 2 stolen photos sat on her phone like ticking bombs. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Something that felt like her grandfather's hands guiding hers. Something that whispered, "Every lock tells a story, baby girl. And this one is just getting started." Real talk. This woman standing in a gangster's hallway with a brass key and 2 stolen photos, knowing every promise he made is a lie. And she's still not running. That's not bravery. That's the kind of love you only get from having nothing left to lose. Celine had set her conditions. Harlan had agreed to every one. And that was exactly what terrified her. Because Victor Harlan never gave anything without planning to take back 10 times more. The fichet bochet was everything her grandfather had promised. It sat in the basement of a private art gallery on the Upper East Side. A squat, elegant vault with a brushed bronze face and 3 independent locking mechanisms layered behind a single dial. French engineering from 1943, built during the occupation when bankers needed to hide gold from both the Nazis and the resistance. The triple curtain system meant 3 separate combinations had to align simultaneously. Most locksmiths didn't even know the 3rd curtain existed. Celine knelt before it the way a pianist sits before a Steinway. She placed Elijah's copper bell stethoscope against the face and turned the dial with the patience of a woman threading a needle in the dark. 11 minutes. The longest she'd taken yet. When the final curtain released, the sound was almost musical. 3 soft chimes in sequence, like a church bell heard from very far away. Inside, bearer bonds. Tens of millions in paper wealth, undated and untraceable. She didn't photograph this time. Trent was standing too close, watching her with new eyes. Not suspicion, something worse. Admiration. "You really are something," he said. Celine packed her grandfather's tools without answering. On the drive back, Trent wasn't driving. A new man sat behind the wheel. Derek Wilkins. Mid-40s, square jaw, quiet hands that gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2, like a man who'd learned discipline the hard way. He was Harlan's head of security, and he hadn't said a word to Celine in the 6 weeks she'd been working. Tonight, stuck in traffic on the bridge, he spoke. "My daughter's 8. He said it to the windshield, not to her. Plays piano. Terrible at it, but she loves it. A pause. Harlan pays for her school, private school, music lessons, Dance recitals. Another pause. Longer this time. He also knows exactly which classroom she sits in. Third row, by the window. Celine said nothing. She understood. Derek Wilkins wasn't Harlan's employee. He was Harlan's hostage, wearing a suit instead of chains. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you looked at that safe tonight the way my daughter looks at a piano." Derek met her eyes in the rearview mirror. And people who look at things that way shouldn't be in places like this. That night, she visited her mother at St. Catherine's. Ruth Brooks lay in the adjustable bed by the window, oxygen tubes in her nose, a crossword puzzle book open on her lap. The room smelled like antiseptic and lavender. Grace Moore, the night nurse, always tucked a sprig of dried lavender under Ruth's pillow. "Baby girl." Ruth's voice was thin as thread, but her eyes were bright. "You look tired." "Long day, Mama." Ruth studied her daughter the way mothers do, reading the chapters Celine tried to keep closed. "You eatin'?" "Yes, Mama." "You lyin'?" Celine smiled. She pulled the chair close and took her mother's hand. The skin was paper thin over bones that felt like bird wings. "Mama, do you remember Grandpa's brass key?" Ruth's eyes softened. "Course I do. Wore it every day of his life. Said it was the most important key he ever owned." "But it doesn't open anything." "That's what I told him." Ruth squeezed her daughter's hand. He said, "Ruth, the locks that matter most don't have keyholes." I told him he was getting senile. She laughed, a sound that dissolved into coughing. Grace appeared with water, steady hands, quiet efficiency. "You got your grandpa's hands, baby," Ruth said after the coughing passed. "But you got my heart. Don't let anyone lock that up." Celine pressed her lips to her mother's forehead. The brass key hung between them, warm against Ruth's hospital gown. Celine unclasped it and placed it gently in her mother's palm. "Hold this for me," she whispered. "I'll come back for it." Ruth's fingers closed around the key. She didn't ask why. Mothers know when their children are walking into storms. Grace walked Celine to the elevator. "She's stable," Grace said, "but the fibrosis is progressing. The new medication is helping, but it's expensive. The insurance is covering everything so far." "Good," Celine paused. "Grace, if anyone comes asking about my mother, anyone who isn't me or her doctors, you call me first." Grace studied her. "Are you in some kind of trouble, Celine?" "I'm in the kind of trouble where the only way out is through." Grace nodded slowly. "Then you go through, and I'll be here when you come back." 3 days later, the trouble found a name. Celine was leaving a grocery store on Maple Street when a man in a gray sedan pulled up beside her. Clean-shaven, blue tie, the kind of face that belonged behind a desk in a building with metal detectors. "Ms. Brooks, my name is Colton Hayes, Special Agent, FBI." He held up a badge. "I'd like to talk to you about Victor Harlan." Celine's blood went cold. "I don't know who that is." "You opened a Whitfield 1889 in his basement 6 weeks ago. Then a Chubb Mark IV on South Decker, a Mosler at Carmine's, a Fichet Bochet at the Ashford Gallery." Hayes recited the facts the way a teacher reads attendance, flat, certain, unchallengeable. "We've been watching Harlan for 4 years, Miss Brooks. You're not in trouble, but you are in danger." Celine set her grocery bags on a bench. Her hands were shaking. "What do you want from me?" "The same thing you want, a way out." Hayes handed her a card, plain white, a phone number, nothing else. "You keep doing what Harlan asks. You open his safes, but you let us know what's inside. Dates, names, amounts, anything you see." "And my mother?" "Full protection. Marshals at St. Catherine's within 48 hours. Invisible. Harlan won't know." Celine stared at the card. A plain white rectangle. The simplest lock in the world. One phone call, and a door opens. "If he finds out, he'll kill me. If you don't help us, he'll kill you anyway. Once those safes are open, you become a liability." Hayes let the silence hold. "You're already inside, Miss Brooks. The question isn't whether you're in danger. It's whether you face it alone or with the full weight of the federal government behind you." She sat in her car for 11 minutes without starting the engine. Then she pulled out her phone and scrolled to the 2 photos from Carmine's. The ledger page, wire transfers, 11 years of blood money flowing through shell companies like sewage through clean pipes. She had already started this. The moment she took those photos, she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Hayes wasn't offering a choice. He was naming the choice she'd already made. She dialed the number. "Agent Hayes, it's Celine Brooks," she exhaled. "Tell me what you need." That night, in her apartment above a laundromat on Vine Street, Celine sat at the kitchen table and stared at a framed photo of Elijah, with his arm around a 10-year-old version of herself, both grinning over a pile of disassembled locks. She was living 2 lives now. By day, the maid who opened safes for a monster. By night, the witness who fed secrets to the men trying to cage him. Both lives required the same thing: steady hands, quiet patience, and the ability to hear what others couldn't. Her grandfather would have understood. Elijah Brooks had spent his whole life opening doors for people who would never let him walk through them. He'd done it with grace, with dignity, with hands that never trembled. Celine's hands trembled now, but they still worked. And tomorrow, Harlan had another safe waiting. What Celine didn't know was that Harlan had received a phone call that same evening, a tip from someone inside the system. There was a leak, and Harlan was already making a list of suspects, starting with the people closest to his safes. Harlan's net was tightening. Over the next 2 weeks, Celine noticed the changes. Small things at first. A new camera above the service entrance. Trent waiting by her car when she left the estate. A phone call Harlan took in front of her, speaking in coded half-sentences. "The plumber says there's a leak. Find it." He was hunting. Celine passed everything to Hayes through a system they'd built together. A burner phone hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible on her bookshelf. A dead-drop location behind a laundromat dryer that hadn't worked since February. Every Tuesday, she left a folded napkin with dates, names, safe contents. Every Thursday, the napkin was gone and a new one appeared with instructions. Hayes was building a case. Dozens of charges across 12 federal statutes. Money laundering, racketeering, wire fraud, tax evasion. And the photographs from the first safe, politicians, judges, a police chief, those were leverage charges, the kind that turned co-conspirators into witnesses. But Hayes needed one more thing, the final safe. "There's a safe in his private study," Hayes told her during a midnight meeting in a parking garage 3 blocks from her apartment. His face was half lit by a fluorescent tube that buzzed like a dying insect. "Behind the oil painting. We've confirmed it on thermal imaging. A Diebold 882, custom modified. Our analysts believe it contains the master ledger. Every transaction, every payment, every name, going back 20 years. Celine leaned against the concrete pillar. "He keeps his study locked. I only go in to clean." "Then clean. And the cameras?" "We'll loop them. 90-second window. That's all we can give you." 90 seconds to open a custom Diebold 882. Her grandfather had called Diebold's stubborn old men. Reliable, predictable, but slow to trust. Custom modifications meant extra pins, false gates, maybe a relocker that would seal the safe permanently if she tripped it. "I need to see the setup first," she said. "I need to know what's behind that painting before I commit to 90 seconds. "You'll have one chance, Ms. Brooks. One." 3 days later, Celine stood in Harlan's study with a vacuum cleaner and a dust cloth. The oil painting hung above the marble fireplace, Harlan seated like a king, eyes following her across the room. She cleaned the mantel, dusted the frame, let her fingers brush the wall behind the canvas. There, a seam in the wood paneling, and behind it, she pressed her ear to the wall, the faintest hum of an electronic lock coupled with a mechanical backup. Diebold 882. Hayes was right. She memorized the dimensions, the position of the hinges, the distance from the dial to the floor, every detail her grandfather had taught her to catalog before touching a lock. That evening, Harlan summoned her to the basement. The same basement where it all started. The empty Whitfield 1889 still sat in the corner, like a monument to the night everything changed. Harlan sat at a folding table. No whiskey, no charm. His face was granite. "Someone is feeding information to the FBI," he said. Celine's heart hammered. She kept her hands still. "I know this because a judge I've paid for 9 years just recused himself from a case involving one of my businesses. Unprompted. No reason given." Harlan's fingers drummed the table. That judge's name was in the Mosler at Carmine's. Celine felt the floor tilt beneath her. "I've narrowed it down to 4 people who knew about that safe's contents. Marco, Dale, the accountant." He paused. "And you." "I told you. I don't look at what's inside." "You told me a lot of things, Celine." Harlan stood, walked around the table slowly. "You told me you're just a maid. You told me you only want to help your mother." He stopped behind her chair. She could feel his breath on the back of her neck. "The question is, which of those things was true?" "All of them." "Then prove it." He placed a hand on her shoulder. The grip was firm, not violent. Worse, possessive. "Tomorrow night, my study, the safe behind the painting. You'll open it while I watch. Every second. No one else in the room." The 90-second window was useless now. No camera loop would matter. No dead drop. No burner phone. Just her, the safe, and the man who would kill her if she made a wrong move. "What's inside?" she asked. "Everything." Harlan released her shoulder. "And when you open it, I'll know I can trust you. Because if you were the leak, you'd never agree to open the one safe that proves it." It was a trap dressed as a test, but it was also the only door left. "What time?" she asked. 10 o'clock. Don't be late." She called Hayes from the parking garage. "It's tomorrow night, 10 o'clock. He'll be in the room watching." Hayes was silent for 5 seconds. "Can you still get what we need?" "I can open the safe, but I can't photograph anything with him standing there." "Then memorize. Names, dates, account numbers, anything you can carry in your head. And if the contents are arranged to catch a leak, then you open it, close it, and walk out. We extract you within the hour. Marshals will have your mother out of St. Catherine's before midnight." Celine closed her eyes. She thought about Derek Wilkins and his daughter in the 3rd row by the window. She thought about Grace Moore tucking lavender under her mother's pillow. She thought about Elijah Brooks driving through the service entrance of a bank he'd saved, his name erased from the record. Every lock tells a story. Tomorrow she would open the last one, and whatever story it told would either set her free or bury her beside the grandfather whose name the world had already forgotten. That night, she pulled the burner phone from the hollowed Bible, typed one message to Hayes: "If I don't call by midnight, get my mother out." Then she lay on her bed, fully clothed, shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling. The apartment was silent except for the rumble of dryers below and the distant wail of a siren that could have been an ambulance or a warning. She pressed her hand flat against her chest and felt her heartbeat. Steady, stubborn, alive. She thought about what her grandfather had said the last time she'd sat on his lap, the week before he died. She'd asked him what happens when you can't open a lock. He'd smiled with those tired, knowing eyes and said, "Then you become the key." She didn't sleep. She didn't need to. Some nights aren't for resting. They're for deciding who you are when the morning comes. I'm not gonna lie. This part broke me. She's on that bed, shoes on, burner phone on her chest. No backup. No escape. Just her grandpa's gift. And a promise to her mama. And she's going back in. That's choosing to die standing over living on your knees. In 12 hours, Celine would walk into Harlan's study for the last time. What she didn't know was that Derek Wilkins had already made a phone call of his own, and the person on the other end wasn't Victor Harlan. At 9:58 p.m., Celine walked into Harlan's study carrying nothing but her grandfather's tool bag. Harlan sat behind his desk. The fire was unlit. The room felt colder without it, all polished wood and silence. Above the fireplace, his oil portrait watched her with painted eyes that mirrored the real ones tracking her every step. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. The painting swings left. The hinges are on the right side. Celine lifted the portrait off its mount. Behind it, recessed into the wall, sat the Diebold 882. Brushed steel face, digital keypad disabled. Someone had ripped out the wiring and sealed it with epoxy, leaving only the mechanical dial. A relocker sat visible behind the faceplate, a hair trigger failsafe that would fire 6 deadbolts if the dial was forced. Harlan crossed his arms. "My last specialist spent 3 days on that safe before I decided he was no longer needed." Celine placed the stethoscope against the steel. The Diebold spoke differently than the others. Deeper, slower, with a resonance that vibrated through her wrist bones. 4 false gates in the first tumbler alone. This lock had been taught to lie. She adjusted, listened past the lies, found the true gates hiding behind the false ones like whispers behind shouting. 3 minutes. The dial stopped. She turned the handle. The Diebold opened. Harlan didn't move. His face didn't change. But something behind his eyes shifted. The way a sky shifts before a storm, all the light pulling back at once. Inside the safe, a single black binder, 3 inches thick, tabbed with colored dividers, red, blue, yellow, green. Celine saw the first page before Harlan stepped forward. Names, dates, dollar amounts. And next to each entry, a code she didn't recognize. But Hayes would. Harlan took the binder, held it against his chest like a child holds a blanket. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "You asked me to open it. I opened it. You didn't even look inside. That was the deal. I open, I walk away." Harlan studied her for a long moment. Then he set the binder on his desk, opened it to a page near the middle, turned it to face her. "Read the name on line 14. Celine looked down. Line 14. Judge Raymond Caldwell, $340,000. Campaign fund plus renovation. Active. "Now you know," Harlan said quietly. "You know a sitting federal judge takes my money. You know his name. You know the amount." He closed the binder. "That makes you family, Celine. And family doesn't leave." The trap. Laid perfectly. By showing her the contents, Harlan had made her complicit. A witness who'd seen inside the safe couldn't claim ignorance. She was bound to him now, not by chains, but by information. Or so he thought. What Harlan didn't know was that Celine's mind had been working from the moment the safe opened. Not on locks, on memory. In the 4 seconds she'd glimpsed the first page, she'd memorized 11 names, 8 dates, and 6 account numbers. The page Harlan showed her added a 12th name and a 7th number. Her grandfather had taught her to listen, but her mother had given her something equally powerful, a memory that held everything it touched. "Can I go now?" she asked. Harlan waved her out. "Derek will drive you." She walked down the hallway. Her legs felt like water. Derek Wilkins was waiting at the service entrance, keys in hand, face unreadable. They drove in silence for 6 blocks. Then Derek pulled into a gas station, killed the engine, and turned around. "I called the FBI," he said. Celine stared at him. 3 days ago. I called Agent Hayes, told him everything I know. The safes, the bribes, the people Harlan made disappear. Derek's jaw tightened. "My daughter deserves better than a father who drives murderers around in a black car." "Derek. Hayes is moving tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." Derek checked the mirrors. "There's a team assembling right now. Federal marshals, SWAT, IRS, Criminal Division. They're hitting the estate, Carmine's, the warehouse, and the gallery, all at once." Celine's hands went to her lap. Steady now. For the first time in weeks, steady. "My mother?" Hayes already pulled her. Grace is with her. They're at a safe house in Virginia. Left 2 hours ago. The air in the car changed. The weight that had been pressing on Celine's chest for weeks, the constant crushing pressure of living between two worlds, lifted. not all of it, but enough to breathe. "The binder," Celine said. "He showed me a page. Judge Caldwell. He wanted to make me complicit." "I know. That's why Hayes moved the timeline. Once Harlan started showing you contents, you became a target and a witness in the same breath." Derek started the engine. "We're going to the field office. You'll give a full deposition tonight. Names, dates, everything you remember." "I remember everything." Derek looked at her in the mirror. Something crossed his face. Not surprise, because he'd stopped being surprised by Celine weeks ago. Recognition. The same look Harlan had given her, but warmer. Human. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. At the FBI field office, Celine sat in a gray room with a metal table and a recording device. Hayes sat across from her. Two assistant prosecutors flanked him with legal pads and tired eyes. "Start from the beginning," Hayes said. Celine talked for 4 hours. She recited names from the Chubb, account numbers from the Mosler, bearer bond serial numbers from the Fichet Bochet, and from the Diebold, the master ledger. 12 names, 8 dates, 6 account numbers, and Judge Raymond Caldwell's $340,000. The prosecutors stopped writing after the first hour. They just listened. One of them took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Miss Brooks," he said, "how do you remember all of this?" Celine touched her neck where the brass key used to hang. The skin was bare now. The key was with her mother, in a safe house in Virginia, held in hands that had never let her down. "My grandfather taught me to listen," she said. "Every lock tells a story. So does every page." At 3:47 a.m., federal agents breached Victor Harlan's estate. They found him in his study, the black binder open on his desk, a glass of whiskey untouched beside it. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He sat in his leather chair beneath his own portrait and watched the agents pour through his door like water through a broken dam. The binder was seized. The safes were cataloged. 31 arrests followed across 3 states. Politicians, judges, bankers, enforcers. The empire that had taken Harlan 20 years to build came apart in a single night, unlocked by a woman he'd called the Help. When they put the handcuffs on Victor Harlan, he asked only one question. Who? The agent closest to him said nothing. But somewhere in a gray room across the city, Celine Brooks was still talking, and every word she spoke was another lock that would never open for him again. 6 months later, the courtroom was standing room only. Federal District Court, Southern District of New York. Case number 24-CR-1187. United States of America versus Victor Allen Harlan. The charges filled 11 pages. Racketeering, money laundering, bribery of public officials, wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, witness intimidation. 31 co-defendants had already pled guilty. The politicians from the photographs, the judges from the ledger, the police chief who'd shaken Harlan's hand at fundraisers while signing off on evidence destruction. Harlan sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, hands folded, chin high. His lead attorney, a man named Prescott who charged $4,000 an hour, had filed 32 motions to dismiss, every one denied. The prosecution called its final witness. The United States calls Celine Brooks. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward. Harlan's jaw tightened. Celine walked to the stand in a navy blue dress her mother had picked out the week before. No jewelry, no makeup. Her neck was bare where the brass key used to hang. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a woman named Angela Whitmore with silver-streaked hair and the calm precision of a surgeon, began. "Ms. Brooks, can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" "I was his maid. Then I was his locksmith." "And how did that transition occur?" Celine told the story. The Whitfield, 1889. The 60 seconds. The laughter that stopped. She told it simply, without drama, the way her grandfather had taught her to work. Steady, patient, letting the truth do the heavy lifting. She described each safe, the Chubb with its photographs, the Mosler with its wire transfers, the Fichet Bochet with its bearer bonds, and the Diebold 882, the master ledger behind the king's portrait. When she recited the names and account numbers from memory, the courtroom went silent. Not impressed silent, awed silent. The kind of silence that happens when people realize they're watching something they'll never forget. Prescott stood for cross-examination. He adjusted his cufflinks, gold, monogrammed, and smiled. "Ms. Brooks, you have no formal training in locksmithing, is that correct?" "Correct. No certifications, no licenses, no degrees of any kind. I dropped out at 16 to take care of my mother." "So your entire expertise comes from, what, sitting on your grandfather's lap?" Celine looked at him. The same look she gave a lock before she opened it. Calm, focused, reading the mechanism. "My grandfather opened the main vault at First National Bank of Tupelo in 1962, when no one else in the state could. He serviced safes for 3 decades. He understood locking mechanisms at a level most engineers never reach." She paused. "He taught me everything, not in a classroom, in a workshop, with real locks, real tools, and real patience. The kind of education that doesn't come with a certificate. It comes with 10,000 hours of practice." Prescott shifted. "And we're supposed to trust your memory of these ledger contents? Without photographs? Without documentation?" "You don't have to trust my memory, counselor." Celine's voice was steady. "Trust the evidence your own forensic team recovered from Mr. Harlan's safes. Every name I recited matches. Every account number I provided has been verified. I didn't need to make anything up. I just needed to remember." Prescott sat down. He didn't ask another question. The prosecutor stood for redirect. "Ms. Brooks, one final question. Why did you do this? You could have opened the safes, taken the money, and walked away. Why risk your life?" Celine was quiet for a moment. The courtroom held its breath. "My grandfather spent his whole life opening doors for people who never let him walk through them," she said. "He fixed their vaults. He saved their banks. He protected their secrets. And they erased his name from every record. Drove him through the service entrance. Buried him in an unmarked grave." Her voice didn't waver. It didn't rise. It carried the weight of something deeper than anger. The quiet, unshakable gravity of someone who has decided to speak. "I did this because the locks people build aren't always about security. Sometimes they're about silence. About keeping the wrong people quiet and the right people invisible. My grandfather understood that. He opened those locks anyway, with dignity, with skill, with hands that never shook." She looked at Harlan. "I did what he would have done. I opened the locks, and I let the truth walk through." The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. In the gallery, a woman in a wheelchair, Ruth Brooks, oxygen tank beside her, Grace Moore's hand on her shoulder, pressed a brass key against her heart and wept without sound. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Harlan stood for sentencing 8 weeks later. 45 years, no parole. As the marshals led him away, he turned and found Celine in the gallery. "Who are you?" he asked. The same question. But this time, it wasn't arrogance. It was something he'd never worn before. Bewilderment. The look of a man who built an empire on locked doors and lost it to the woman who cleaned his floors. Celine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer was in every safe she'd opened, every name she'd remembered, every lock that had spoken to her in the language her grandfather had taught her to hear. Spring came to Tupelo the way it always does. Slow, green, forgiving. On a Saturday morning in April, Celine stood outside a small storefront on Main Street. The sign above the door was hand-painted in gold letters. Brooks & Son, Locksmith. Established 2024. The "and son" was deliberate. Elijah had always called her "my boy" when she worked alongside him. It was his joke, his pride, his way of saying she was everything he'd hoped for. Ruth sat in her wheelchair by the front window, breathing easier now. New medication, clean air, and a daughter who came home every night. Grace stood beside her, arms crossed, smiling like a woman who'd earned the right. Derek Wilkins had received a reduced sentence. 18 months, community service, full cooperation credit. His daughter still played piano, still terrible at it, still loved it. He'd written Celine a letter from the minimum security facility in upstate New York. Thank you for reminding me what keys are actually for. Inside the shop, behind the glass counter, Celine had built a small display. Elijah's copper bell stethoscope, his oldest tension wrench, the handle worn smooth by 50 years of use, and in the center, mounted on a velvet stand, the brass key. A small card beneath it read, "This key never opened any lock, but it opened everything that mattered." Elijah Brooks, 1891 to 2005. The morning sun fell through the front window and caught the brass, sending a warm glow across the counter. Celine stood in that light and breathed. The bell above the door chimed. A girl walked in, 10 years old, dark skin, bright eyes, a backpack too big for her shoulders. She looked around the shop with the wide, hungry curiosity of someone seeing a world she didn't know existed. "Can you teach me?" she asked. Celine smiled. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a padlock. A simple one, 5 pins, the same model Elijah had used to teach her 30 years ago. "Come here," she said. "Let's start with listening." The girl set down her backpack, walked to the counter, placed her small fingers on the lock. And somewhere, in whatever place old locksmiths go when their work is finally done, Elijah Brooks smiled. What lock is holding you back? Drop it in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you already know what to do.